This video is sponsored by DevMountain. If you're interested in learning web development, iOS, or UX design, DevMountain is a 12-week design and development bootcamp intended to get you a full-time position in the industry. To learn more, visit devmountain.com or click the link in the description below. What's going on, guys? So I've had quite a few requests to do something to do with animations in React, and we're going to be looking at a library called ReactSpring today, and we're going to create a pretty simple little demo application with it just to give you the foundation of how it works. So this is what we'll be creating. Basically, when I load the page, component 1 will slide down, and then component 2 will fade in. And you can see we also have a counter here that's going to go from 1 to 10 because we can basically animate props or text. And then down here we have a button to toggle component 3 so we can fade that in and out. All right, so it's pretty simple, but I think, again, it'll give you the foundation you need to create some cool stuff. And you probably want to take a look at the documentation. There's some really good examples here, as you can see. So we have Spring, transitions. So we have transitions, we have keyframes. One thing I want to note is that right here it says one of the strengths of Spring is that it can apply animations without relying on React to render updates frame by frame like most animation libraries do. So with what we're doing, it's simple enough where you're probably not going to see a difference between other libraries, but if you're doing something really advanced and intricate, then you're going to get a better performance from ReactSpring. So let's close this out because we're going to start from scratch here. Over here in VS Code, I have just a completely wiped out boilerplate that I use Create React App. I just got rid of all the default markup and got rid of the logo and all that. Basically, it's just an app.js, and we're rendering out an H1. One thing I did add is a couple lines of CSS in the app.css, just a reset Arial font and increase the font size on the heading. So if you want to follow along, just generate a new application, add that little bit of CSS, and you should be good to go. So before we run the dev server, I'm going to install ReactSpring. So we want to do npm install react-spring, and that will install it for us. And then what we'll do is create our component 1, component 2, and component 3. So let's run the dev server here with npm start. Whoops, hold on, I have something running on that port. Let me just cancel that out and run that again. All right, so we should see welcome render out on the page here. Now I'm going to create a new folder in the source folder called components, and let's create a new file called component1.js. Okay, so this is going to be a functional component, and I have an extension for VS Code called ES7 React Redux Snippets, and using that, I can just do RFC tab or enter, and it will generate a functional component. If you don't have that extension or you're using a different editor, just go ahead and create a functional component. Just copy this. And then we're just going to put an H1 in here and say component 1. And let's put a paragraph, and we'll just do lorem 30. Okay, so we'll save that. Let's bring it into app.js. So we'll import component 1 from, and let's bring that in from component/component1, and I'm going to close up the sidebar to give us some more room, and then I'm just going to replace the H1 with component 1 and save, and now we can see our component. All right, so I'm going to add some initial styling here. So let's give this a style, and I want to set style equal to, and we'll call this C1 style. All right, and if this stuff confuses you, go ahead and watch my React crash course I created about 2 weeks ago. We go over all of this stuff. I also have a course on Udemy called React Front to Back. So we're going to create a variable down here called C1 style, and let's set a background of steel blue and a color of white, and let's do padding We'll say 1.5 rem and save, and there we go. So now we have a little bit of styling to our component. Now we're going to implement ReactSpring. So let's go ahead and import. We want to import Spring from ReactSpring. And the way that this works is we want to go into the return here, and we want to return Spring. It's not that we have to return Spring, but whatever we want to animate, we want to put inside of here. So I want to animate the whole thing. And inside here, we want to open up some curly braces, and it's going to give us some props. And we want to set that to an arrow function and then some parentheses. And then we need to have a container element that has a style, and we pass in props to the style. Okay, so that's how this works. And then whatever we want to animate, we can put within this div, which is going to be our entire output here of our JSX. So let's put that right in here. Just tab that over. All right, now if I save this, it's going to go blank because this spring component here, this actually has to have a couple props passed into it, which is the from and to props. So it works just like, you know, CSS keyframes. We're going to say from equals double curly brace, and then basically our starting point. So let's say we want to start with an opacity of 0, so it'll basically be invisible. And then let's set to go to opacity 1. All right, and it will animate from being opacity 0, invisible, all the way to being completely opaque, which would be 1. So let's save, and there we go. So you can see that when the page loads, it fades in. All right, now I also want it to come down from the top, so I'm going to add an additional property of margin top, and the starting point will be -500 because we want it to be out, you know, up above, out of the screen, and then we want to bring it to margin top 0, which is its natural position. So we'll save, and there we go. So it's as easy as that to add to create simple animations. Now, component 2, I want to fade in underneath after this comes down. So let's create a new file in components called component2.js. And I'm actually going to do a class-based component here because this is going to have the button where we want to be able to toggle component 3. So we need to pass props up, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But let's generate a class-based component. We can do RCE with that extension I have installed. If you don't have it, just go ahead and copy this. And it's basically in the render we want, let's first bring in ReactSpring. So we'll say import Spring from ReactSpring, and let's grab from component 1 this whole thing right here, this whole Spring component, and we're going to put that right in the return. Okay, so we'll paste that in. Now I don't want the margin top, I just want it to fade in, so I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm also going to change this to C2 style. Change this title to component 2, and then let's copy the styling from component 1 and change it to C2 style, C2, and the only difference is going to be the color. I'm going to say slate blue. All right, so let's save that, and then we'll go to app.js, and we're going to bring that in. So we want to import component 2 from, we want to go into the components folder, and we want component 2, and then we'll just embed that down here. Whoops. All right, so component 2, good. So what's happening is component 2 is just being embedded. It is fading in, as you can see. If you look, it fades in really quick, but it gets pushed down because the component above it obviously it's going to push it down. Now, what we want to happen is we want to set a delay. I also want it to take longer to fade in because it fades in really quick by default. So let's go back into component 2, and let's add here a config and let's set a delay of 1000, so that's 1000 milliseconds, so 1 second, and then let's set the duration to 1000 and save. So now it comes in, waits a second, and then it takes a second to fade in. Okay, so that's that. Now I want to show you how we can do the inner text. So basically, if we go to the documentation here, kind of shows you how that works right here. So this number we can set, doesn't have to be number, we can call this anything, and then we can access that with props. Okay, so we can say props.number. Now we want to put this in component 1, so let's go to component 1.js, and we want to put it right below the paragraph here. So right here, let's open up another Spring tag, and as far as the from and to, we're going to say from, and let's set number to 0 initially, and then we'll have it end at 10. So let's say from number 0 to number 10. And then just like we did above, here we're going to put in some curly braces. Actually, we don't need to do that. We'll say props, open up some parentheses, and then we're going to have a div, and we're going to give this a style, and we want to pass in the props. Okay, and I wanted to put this in an H1, so I'm going to do an H1, and I'm going to actually give this a style of counter, and then we can actually access it with props. Okay, so this right here, and we can access number. Okay, anything we put in here we can access through these props. So let's say dot number. All right, and then for the styling, I'm just gonna grab that real quick and paste that in. Now if I save this, you'll see that it goes from 0 to 10, but it goes very fast, and it shows decimal points. So to fix that, let's add in a config, okay, because we want to slow this down. And I'm going to do a duration of 10 seconds, so 10,000 milliseconds. And then to get rid of the decimals, we'll just simply add on the toFixed method, which is just a JavaScript method, and save. And now it'll take 10 seconds to animate, and it'll also get rid of those decimals with the toFixed. All right, so that's that. Now we're going to start to look at transitions. And the way that this is going to work is we want it to look at a piece of our component state and basically transition based on that. So in our app.js, I'm going to create some state. Oops, we want to go above render, and let's create state. And let's set that to an object, and we'll create show component. Let's do show component 3, because that's the one we're toggling, and we're going to set that to false. And what I want to do is have an animation so that when we click a button, we can fade it in, or you could add, we could position it so it slides in, whatever, however you want to do it, it's fine. Now I want to put the button inside of component 2. So we're going to have to actually have an event on that button in component 2 to pass up a prop so that we can then create a method here to toggle it. All right, and then implement the transition. So I guess first we'll create the actual component. So let's say component3.js, and let's do, it's going to be a functional component, and it's just going to have an H1, component 3, paragraph, and just add some initial style here. So C3 style, and I'm just going to grab that. All right, so this component doesn't really, we're not doing anything here. It's just basically displaying this markup, this JSX here. So I'm going to bring this in to app.js. So we want to import component 3, and for now I'm just going to put it in here and save. Okay, so now it's just there. Now let's create the button in component 2. So in component 2, I'm going to go below the paragraph, and let's create a button, and we'll say toggle component 3, And let's add a style of btn, and let's do an on click. Now remember, the state is above us in app.js, so we're just going to say this dot props dot toggle, and then we'll catch that up above in app.js. But let me quickly just add that styling in real quick. So let's see, paste that in. All right, so we'll save. And now component 2 has a button. And when we click that, it's going to call this.props.toggle. So in app.js on component 2, we want to add toggle and set that to whatever we want to happen, which I'm just going to call a method called toggle. All right, and then we'll add that here. So we use an arrow function. And let's just make sure that it actually works. So we'll just say console log 1, 2, 3. Let's open up our tools here and click it, and we see 1, 2, 3. All right, now I just want this toggle to change the state of show component 3. So we're going to say this dot set state, and we want to set show component 3 to whatever it's not. So not this dot state dot show component 3. All right, now obviously we could have it so that we could toggle it and just say if it's true, then show it. If not, then don't. And we could toggle it and it would just disappear. But we want it to fade out, to transition. So that's where ReactSpring comes in. So let's bring in from ReactSpring transition. And we also want something called animate. And that's going to be from ReactSpring. All right, now I'm going to go down here and I'm going to just get rid of this component 3, because what we want to do is put in a transition. And this is going to take in quite a few things. It's going to take in native, and you can see all the different properties here if you go to the documentation for transition. So we have we'll be using from, enter. You can obviously add config, items. Now items is basically going to be what we want to look at. And in our case, it's going to be this piece of state, this show component 3. So let's add items equals this dot state dot show component 3. And then we want to have an enter. Where is it? So we want from, enter, and leave. So let's add those. So from, we're going to set the opacity to 0. And then enter, we want to set opacity to 1. And then leave, we want to set opacity to 0. So basically we want it to start at opacity 0. We don't want it to show at the beginning. When it enters, we want it to show, so we want opacity 1. When we click it to leave, then we want opacity 0. Now in here is a little weird. We have to open up curly braces just like we did before, but we're going to have this show and then an arrow function, and we're going to say show and then open up some parentheses, and this is where we get our props. Okay, and then we have another arrow function, and we set this to parentheses, and then we have our div. Actually, you know what? In this case, we need to use this animate, or this should be animated, sorry. So animated, say animated, and it's going to be a div, so animated.div. And we're going to pass in the style here of props. Okay, and then whatever we want to show is going to go in here, which is going to be component 3. So we'll say component 3, and that should do it. So let's save. And now if we click this toggle component, component 3 fades in. All right, so it adds that effect, and obviously you could add any CSS properties or any style properties that you want for these, so you can do some cool stuff with it. But I want to keep this very basic. It's basically just so you guys have a foundation so that you can continue on and create some cool stuff. All right, so I think that's it. I will put a link in the description to this code if you want it to use it for reference. Also, check out the documentation. It has a bunch of great examples. But that's it, guys. Thanks for watching. Please leave a like if you like this video. If you're not subscribed and you like this type of content, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you next time.